He stood there every single morning, a small figure among the endless footsteps of strangers. The train station was alive with noise, the clattering wheels of trains, the hurried voices of people rushing for work, the loudspeaker echoing departures and arrivals. And yet, in the middle of all that chaos, he sat silently. A golden-brown dog, with tired eyes but an unshakable patience, watching the same platform gate as if it carried the answer to his life. Most people ignored him. To many, he was just another stray wandering the streets, finding warmth wherever he could. But those who looked closer noticed something strange. This dog wasn't roaming, begging, or looking for food. He was waiting, always waiting. His body still, his gaze locked on the crowd pouring out of the train doors every single day. The first week, commuters smiled kindly at him. They thought he must be lost, separated from someone who would soon return. By the second week, some tried to feed him or pet him, but he never followed them home. By the third week, the whispers began, stories of what he might be waiting for. Children would point him out to their parents, calling him the little guardian. Vendors at the station would watch him in curiosity as they sold their tea and newspapers. He became a quiet puzzle inside the noise of the city. But what no one knew was that this little dog had a story written in loyalty and heartbreak, and it had begun long before the station ever knew his name. His name was Hachiko. Years earlier, in the quiet streets of Shibuya, Japan, a kind professor had found him as a pup. The man had been walking home from the university when he heard soft whimpering from a box left near the roadside. Inside was the fragile, trembling puppy with golden fur and dark eyes that seemed far too wise for his age. The professor, though never having planned to own a pet, felt something stir in his heart. Without a second thought, he lifted the tiny creature into his arms and carried him home. That home became a sanctuary. Hachiko grew quickly, his small paws turning into strong legs, his soft cries into a deep bark that filled the house with life. He followed the professor everywhere, padding behind him from room to room, sleeping at his feet during long hours of study, and wagging his tail whenever his master spoke. There was no command needed, no leash necessary, just an unspoken bond of trust and love. Every morning the professor would leave for work, and Hachiko would walk with him to the station. He would sit beside him on the short walk, trot proudly beside his legs, and once they arrived at the bustling platform, he would sit down, tail swishing gently. The professor would pat his head, whisper a kind word, and then step onto the train. Hachiko would remain there, watching until the train disappeared into the distance. Then, without fail, he would return again at evening, waiting at the same spot until the train brought his master back. Day after day, this ritual unfolded like clockwork. Locals began to notice the faithful little dog and his professor companion. They admired the sight, the loyalty in the dog's eyes, the affection in the professor's smile. It was not just routine, it was devotion carved into the rhythm of their lives. But one evening, Hachiko's world shattered. The morning had been ordinary. The walk had been ordinary. The goodbye had been ordinary. But when the train returned that evening, the professor did not step out. Passengers rushed past, families reunited, children calling out in laughter, but Hachiko sat, ears pricked, eyes scanning every face. The crowd thinned, the station emptied, the night grew cold, and still he waited. His master never returned. What Hachiko could not understand was that the professor had suffered a sudden heart attack at work. He had collapsed in the middle of a lecture and never regained consciousness. The man who had saved a trembling puppy years ago was gone forever, leaving behind only an empty house and a loyal heart that did not know how to stop waiting. Yet Hachiko didn't know death. He only knew loyalty. And so, the next morning, he returned to the station. He sat at the same spot, eyes fixed on the evening train. When the doors opened, He searched every face again, but none belonged to the man he loved. The next day he came back, and the next, and the next. Days became weeks, weeks became months. The professor's family eventually moved away, but Hachiko refused to leave the station. No matter who tried to take him in, he always escaped and found his way back. The station became his home, the crowd his company, the endless hope of seeing his master again his only reason to stay. He stood there every single day, rain or shine. A small dog sitting quietly at the same spot of a crowded train station. People passed by, rushing to their destinations, but the dog never moved. His eyes were always fixed on the arrival gate, as if waiting for someone to return. At first, passengers thought he was just lost, but days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The same little figure, sitting patiently, tail barely moving, ears lifting at every train that arrived. The locals started whispering. Who was he waiting for? Why wouldn't he leave? Some tried to take him home, but no matter what, he always returned to the exact same spot. And soon, this dog became a mystery that captured the hearts of an entire city. By now, people had begun to whisper his story. Newspapers wrote about the faithful dog of Shibuya. Children would bring him food. Vendors would save scraps of meat or rice for him. Strangers would stop and pet him, sometimes with tears in their eyes. He was no longer just a stray, he was a symbol. Still, Hachiko waited. Through rainstorms he waited. Through snow, he waited. Through the burning summer heat, he waited. Every train that pulled into the station carried the same promise in his heart. Maybe today, his master would return. But as years passed, the professor never returned, and yet the dog never gave up. And so, the little figure at the station became more than a dog. He became a mystery of loyalty, a story people could not explain. For how could a creature so small, with no understanding of death, hold on to a love so strong that not even time could break it? Even as his fur grew rougher, his eyes cloudier, and his steps slower, Hachiko remained in the same place every evening, watching the same gate, searching the same faces. And each person who saw him couldn't help but wonder, what was he truly waiting for? Because maybe, in his heart, he knew something humans could never understand. The evening air at Shibuya station always carried a rhythm, train wheels grinding, footsteps hurrying, vendors calling out their last sales of the day. And in the middle of it all, as steady as the iron rails themselves, was Hachiko. His fur had grown rougher now, his tail not as lively as it once was, but his eyes still carried the same light. They scanned the crowd every evening, looking for that one familiar face. Passengers came to expect him. For newcomers, it was curiosity. Why did a lone dog sit so patiently at the same place every night? For regulars, it was comfort. They knew the story. They had read about him in the newspapers. They had seen the boy carrying rice balls to feed him, the old woman brushing snow off his back during the harsh winter, the station master gently patting his head before the morning rush began. The people began to care for him in ways he could never have imagined. Vendors would leave scraps of meat. Strangers would drop coins into a small tin to buy food for him. Children would stop, kneeling down to stroke his fur, whispering to their parents, "Is he still waiting?" And the answer was always yes. But what struck everyone most was not simply his presence. It was the feeling. Standing near him, one felt both heartbroken and inspired. There was sadness in seeing him wait for someone who would never return, but also awe in his unshaken devotion. Humans longed for loyalty like his, yet they knew few could ever match it. The years began to change Shibuya. New trains came, new schedules, new faces, shops closed and new ones opened. Fashion shifted, technology grew, the city became louder, brighter. But Hachiko never changed. Through 9 long years, he returned to the same spot. He would leave only for brief moments to find shade or water, sometimes wandering to the professor's old home, sitting at the doorstep as if expecting it to open. But no matter where he went, by evening, he was always back at the station. He endured everything the world threw at him. Heavy snow blanketed the streets, but Hachiko lay curled against the wall, his fur dusted white, his breath forming little clouds. In the scorching summer, when the ground burned beneath his paws, he sought shelter beneath a bench, but his eyes never left the platform gates. Rain would drench him to the bone, yet he stayed, shaking droplets from his coat, ears pricked for the sound of the whistle that once carried his master. The people admired him, but they also pitied him. They wondered why he never gave up. Some whispered that perhaps he saw things they could not, that he believed one day the professor would step out of the train just as he always had. Others believed it was not about waiting anymore, but about honoring love. That Hachiko knew, deep in his heart, that his purpose was to remain there, and so he became more than just a dog. He became a story, a legend told across Japan. Families would visit Shibuya just to see him, to tell their children, "That is Hachiko, the faithful one." His name became a symbol of devotion so pure that even strangers who had never known the professor were moved to tears. But behind those famous photographs, behind the admiration of a nation, there was a quiet pain. His paws grew tired, his body weaker, his muzzle turned grey. Still, every evening, he would rise with the same slow determination, limping if he had to, dragging his frail body back to the station. And then one evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline and the trains pulled into the station, Hachiko's spot was empty. People looked around, concerned. Had he wandered off? Was he hurt? The station felt strangely incomplete without him. Days passed. He did not appear. The crowd grew restless with worry, whispering about their faithful friend. Until one cold morning, they found him. Curled in the corner of a narrow street not far from the station, Hachiko had finally laid down for the last time. His body was still, his breathing silenced, but his expression was peaceful. It was as if, after years of waiting, he had at last found his master again, not in the train that never brought him home, but in a place beyond where trains could go. The city mourned. Newspapers carried his story across Japan. Crowds gathered at Shibuya station not to see the waiting dog anymore, but to honor him. Flowers were laid at his spot. Children wept. Adults bowed their heads. The silence of that day was heavier than the noise of all the trains combined. But this was not the end of Hachiko's story. It was the beginning of something greater. For his loyalty did not die with him. It lived on in the hearts of those who saw him, in the photographs that captured him, in the statue they soon built to honor his memory. At Shibuya station, where he had waited for 9 long years, a bronze Hachiko was placed so that he could wait forever. And even today, nearly a century later, people still gather there. Travelers pause to touch the statue, couples take photos, families tell their children the story of the faithful dog who never gave up. Hachiko became more than a pet. He became a lesson to the world, a reminder of a love that does not break, a loyalty that does not end, and a mystery that no one can explain. For some believe that even now, when the last train leaves Shibuya late at night, a shadow still waits by the platform gate. A small dog, golden brown, ears pricked, eyes searching, waiting, always waiting. The story of Hachiko did not end the day his body was found on that narrow street. In truth, it was only then that the world truly began to understand the depth of his devotion. News spread like fire, carried not only through Japan, but across oceans. Newspapers published his photographs, showing the small figure sitting patiently at the station gates. Writers and poets used his story to capture what human words could never fully explain. A loyalty so absolute, so pure, that even death could not defeat it. In homes across Tokyo, people read the articles aloud to their children. Families whispered his name with reverence, and tears were shed by people who had never met him. There was something in Hachiko's waiting that touched the deepest part of the human spirit. For every person who had ever lost someone, for every heart that had ever longed for someone who would never return, Hachiko became a mirror. He was their grief, their hope, their devotion, made flesh in the body of a dog. At Shibuya Station, the emptiness he left behind was unbearable. Commuters who had grown used to his presence found themselves scanning the platform, expecting to see him and feeling a sudden hollowness when they realized he would never be there again. The vendors who had saved scraps of food for him would glance at the corner where he always lay and sigh quietly. Children, once eager to run to him, now clung to their parents, asking why the faithful dog had to leave. And no one had a simple answer. The city decided that such a life could not simply vanish. Plans were made, and soon a sculptor was chosen. Bronze was melted, molded, and shaped until at last a statue of Hachiko stood at the very station where he had waited so long. It was a simple but powerful creation, his body upright, his eyes forward, his posture patient, exactly as people remembered him. On the day of the unveiling, a crowd gathered. Old men and women, workers, schoolchildren, strangers and friends stood side by side. Many had seen him with their own eyes. Others had only heard stories. But all came to honor the little dog who had become something far larger than himself. Flowers were placed at the base of the statue, incense burned, and tears rolled silently down cheeks. The station, usually filled with the noise of trains and footsteps, was hushed with reverence, and in that moment, Hachiko's wait became eternal. But the power of his story did not remain in Shibuya alone. Travelers carried it to other cities, other lands. Foreign visitors spoke of him when they returned home. Writers told his tale in books and essays. In time, his legend crossed oceans, reaching Europe, America, and beyond. Everywhere, people marveled at how a creature with no words, no voice but a bark, could teach lessons deeper than the speeches of kings. Hachiko became more than a dog of Japan. He became the world's symbol of loyalty, yet the mystery remained. Why had he continued to wait? Scientists debated it. Some argued that dogs form bonds so strong that they cannot let go, that his behavior was instinct shaped by attachment. Others claimed it was habit, a routine so deeply imprinted that even loss could not erase it. But none of these explanations satisfied the heart. For people who stood before his statue, it was not science that explained him. It was love, and love, as they knew, is often a mystery. In the years that followed, Shibuya Station changed again. New buildings rose, crowds grew larger, technology transformed the skyline, but through it all, the bronze figure remained, patiently waiting. People who hurried through the station every day would pause, even for a moment, to glance at him. Tourists from across the world would search for him, touch his paw for luck, take photographs beside him. And in each photograph, in every whispered story, Hachiko's wait continued. Children grew up hearing his name, carrying the story into new generations. Writers wrote novels inspired by him, filmmakers created movies that carried his image onto screens across the globe. His tale was retold in different languages, but the essence never changed. A dog who waited for the one he loved, long after the world told him to give up. And still, late at night, some say the station carries echoes. The final train departs, the crowd thins, the vendors close their stalls. The city sleeps. And in the silence, if one listens closely, it is said you can hear soft footsteps, claws clicking gently on the ground. A small shadow moves toward the platform gate, sits quietly and waits. Not bronze, not flesh, but memory. Perhaps it is imagination. Perhaps it is the heart's way of refusing to let go. Or perhaps, just perhaps, Hachiko never truly left. For in the minds of those who believe, loyalty that strong cannot vanish. It becomes something eternal, something unseen but felt, lingering in the spaces we cannot measure. And so, long after his body returned to the earth, Hachiko continues his vigil, not for himself, not even for his master, but for everyone who needs to believe that love never ends. Because the faithful dog of Shibuya is not only a story, he is a reminder, a lesson, a mystery carved into the soul of the world. The mountains stood silent in the distance, their snowy peaks reflecting the pale moonlight. A storm was rolling in, and with it came a chill that seemed unnatural, as though the air itself carried whispers of the forgotten. Ilara and the others pressed forward, lanterns swaying in the wind, their footsteps crunching on gravel paths that twisted along the cliffs. For hours, the group had been retracing the prisoner's rumored escape route. Every step revealed something strange: claw marks on tree trunks, ancient runes burned into rocks, and faint echoes that seemed to follow them no matter how quietly they moved. Each sign hinted that they weren't chasing a man at all, but something much darker that had been reshaped by time and vengeance. "We're close," whispered Arik, his voice almost lost against the howling wind. He pointed to a ruined watchtower at the edge of the mountain ridge. Its top had crumbled long ago, leaving only a jagged silhouette against the night sky. Local legends called it the Tower of Silent Screams. They said prisoners who vanished from the dungeons were taken here, never to be seen again. The air grew heavier as they approached. Birds had stopped singing, and even the restless wind seemed to die the closer they got. Inside, the tower reeked of damp earth and rusted chains. Moss climbed the stone walls, but beneath it, carvings remained clear. Symbols of binding, circles of protection, sigils meant to trap something that should never walk free. Ilara ran her fingers over one of the carvings, feeling the grooves. "These are not the markings of guards," she said. "This is sorcery, old, forbidden sorcery." As she spoke, a faint hum stirred the air. At first it sounded like wind whistling through cracks, but it carried rhythm, as though voices were rising from the walls themselves. The group froze. The voices whispered in unison, not in any language they knew, but their intent was clear. Leave now. But leaving was no longer an option. A sudden thud echoed from the tower's base. Chains rattled, though no one had touched them. Shadows moved along the walls, shifting unnaturally against the flickering lantern light. Then, from the darkness below, came a low growl, guttural and human yet wrong. Arik drew his sword, though his hands shook. "He's here," he muttered, "the prisoner." But what stepped out of the shadows was not the broken figure of a man. His eyes burned with a ghostly fire, and his skin bore the scars of decades spent in chains. Around his wrists, broken shackles still clung, glowing faintly as if heated from within. The prisoner looked at them, not as victims, not as enemies, but as witnesses. "You followed me?" he said, his voice a chorus of layered tones. "Do you know what they took from me? Do you know why I waited in silence for 30 years? Ilara steadied her voice. "Tell us." The prisoner raised his hand, and the walls of the tower shuddered. Images spilled into the air, visions of a king betraying his most loyal general, of a man framed for treason, of chains forged not to punish, but to suppress power that could have ended a dynasty. "I was never the villain," he said. "I was their greatest weapon, until they feared I had learned too much." His gaze hardened. "But you still have a choice. Stand with me, or be swallowed by the same silence they condemn me to." For a moment, no one breathed. The weight of his words pressed against their minds. Ilara's heart pounded. Was she looking at a victim of betrayal, or the birth of something far more dangerous than any tyrant? Before she could answer, the tower itself cracked. The runes glowed violently, fighting to contain his presence. The prisoner roared, his voice shaking the stone.
The bindings break tonight. The kingdom will remember me, not as a shadow, but as the storm that ends them. Lightning split the sky outside. The storm had arrived, and with it, the forgotten prisoner's revenge began. The moon drifted higher in the midnight sky as the crowd outside the royal palace waited in tense silence. News of the tomb's revelations had already spread across the kingdom. Everyone wanted to know if the old prophecy was true, if the empire's fate had been sealed long before they were born. Inside, the scholars worked tirelessly, piecing together every inscription. The last tablet they found was carved with trembling hands, almost as if the scribe knew he was documenting something forbidden. It read, "The prisoner was no ordinary man. He was the blood heir to the throne, betrayed by his brother and locked away to erase his claim. His vow was not just of revenge, but of return. On the day his name is spoken aloud to the masses, the throne shall fall." Gasps filled the chamber. The name was there, etched faintly, but still legible. The forgotten heir's identity would shake the foundation of everything the people believed. But here came the true dilemma. If the scholars revealed the name, they risked fulfilling the prophecy. If they kept it hidden, the mystery would consume the people until rebellion tore the kingdom apart. The king, pale and trembling, demanded the stone be destroyed. Yet the high priest raised his hand and stopped him. "Once truth is unearthed, it cannot be buried again," he warned. That night, the people gathered in the square. The high priest stepped forward, torchlight casting long shadows on the ancient walls. He held the tablet high, his voice echoing through the silence. He spoke the name. In that instant, the earth rumbled, as if the forgotten prisoner himself had risen to claim what was his. Torches flickered, the palace walls trembled, and the kingdom knew the prophecy had begun, and with it, a truth more terrifying than any dungeon, any crown, or any ghost, the realization that history had not been written by the victors, but by the betrayers. The prisoner's revenge had finally arrived.